Cowboy diet and lifestyle took inspiration from the peoples that had been working the land long before Americans started moving west. Living in a time before refrigeration, cowboys relied on ingredients that could last for months or even years without spoiling, and consequently borrowed many Native American food preservation methods. While foraging along the trail for herbs, berries, and even bird eggs was common practice, there were many staples cowboys packed with them. If they weren't elegant, meals on the trail were certainly hearty, since they had to keep herding crews going for long, arduous, dusty days full of exertion. Cowboys also took cultural and culinary inspiration from Mexican vaqueros. Experts at herding cattle, long before settlers ventured west, vaqueros developed many of the tools necessary for the trade, like chaps and lassos, and in the early days of the West, trained many cowboys to be. Having herded cattle for hundreds of years, these skilled horsemen were veterans of living and cooking on the move. Recipes for their wholesome fare were another of the many things cowboys adopted directly from the vaquero lifestyle. 1. Cuisine the cowboy. The role of the cowboy developed alongside the formation of a ranching economy in the Americas, which is an industry with colonial roots. Spanish settlers brought cows across the Atlantic on some of the first ships that berthed in the New World, and cattle rearing was especially successful in the Southwest, in parts of Mexico and Texas, where vaqueros reigned. Texas became the hotspot for a cattle industry, though before the Civil War, cattle were raised more for their skin and fat than their potential as a meat source. Their hide was used to make leather, a versatile material, though their fat had even more adaptability once boiled into tallow, which as a malleable substance had many potential uses. These uses included cooking, making soap, and molding into candles, an especially important commodity in a world that hadn't yet discovered electricity. The advancement of railroad networks around the same time as the Civil War created a convenient means of supplying a growing demand for meat, and the wide ranges and open prairies of the American West were ideal locations for raising cattle. This culmination of innovation and consumption in the mid-19th century set the stage for the cowboy to become an important figure in the American economy and the subsequent push west. 2. Chuck wagon fare changed the cowboy diet. In the early days of the West, cowboys only ate whatever they could carry in their saddlebags or kill on sight. But as the demand for beef grew with a growing and migrating population seeking gold and manifest destiny, the skeleton crews that had previously worked with cattle grew into large-scale operations to accommodate a rapidly expanding industry. The cowboy's job, as their name suggests, was to herd cattle, a rough and unrewarding occupation that entailed pushing large herds on cattle drives, from middle-of-nowhere ranches to central markets, auctions, or railroad depots, where cows would be sold and transported. Passing through vast expanses of wild lands, there was nowhere to sleep or eat but under the open sky. This job came with no Old West glamour, but camping overnight took on a bit of home comfort with the introduction of the chuck wagon. Attributed to Charles Goodnight, this mobile kitchen and pantry consisted of a revamped army supply wagon that would travel alongside the cowboys on the cattle trail. Equipped with cast-iron kettles, pans, and Dutch ovens, and pulled by a team of up to 6 oxen, the chuck wagon didn't travel light, but it made fresh, hot meals possible. This home-cooked chuck was a big step up from the preserved stuff cowboys previously relied on. Dining together in the afternoons and evenings on plein air, cowboys could enjoy more camaraderie, and hearty fare made for happier workers. 3. The cook made the team. Perhaps in the humor of the cowboys' rough-and-tumble ways, they had many names of reverence for the cook who rounded out their crew. Cookie was a popular appellation, but Dr. Slatta suggests many more inventive names made their way into the cowboy lexicon, such as beanmaster, pot rustler, biscuit shooter, dough puncher, grub slinger. Cooks earned cowboys' respect beyond their wholesome grub by keeping longer days than the cowboys themselves. They woke up the earliest to prepare breakfast for their team and were always on the job. As soon as one meal was through, the cook would move on to a new location to set up the kitchen again for the next meal. Dinner was lunchtime, and supper was in the evening. But despite their required culinary aptitude and efficiently working wonders to keep meals interesting with limited ingredients, cooks on the cattle trail wore many more than a mere chef's hat. They also carried first aid supplies in the chuck wagon, taking on the unofficial role of doctor or veterinarian when duty called. Because they kept a cattle crew going, The title of cook was a position of esteem and influence. Accordingly, cooks were paid higher than cowboys. A good cook could make a cattle drive a success, just as a bad cook might deter cowboys from seeking work with a particular ranch. 4. Coffee was taken strong and barefooted. Coffee was a daily necessity in the West, but because green coffee beans kept best, whipping up a simple brew on the trail wasn't exactly simple. Beans had to be roasted and ground first. That is, until two enterprising upstarts started supplying roasted and even pre-ground coffee. While James Athiarn Folger dominated the market of gold miners along the West Coast, John Arbuckle Jr. invented the brand that fueled the frontier. Arbuckle's innovation for preserving coffee beans included a trick that gave them superior flavor too. HistoryNet explains that while roasting the beans, he coated them with a mixture of sugar, eggs, and Irish moss. Making Arbuckle's blend so popular, his name became interchangeable with coffee itself. Coffee was an obligatory tool in the cowboys' arsenal, an essential pick-me-up for a job that necessitated early mornings, long days, and frequent all-nighters. Before chuck wagons, many cowboys often carried a coffee pot in their saddlebags, but once cooks joined on the cattle trail, coffee was boiling constantly in 5-gallon pots. True West Magazine reports cowboys took their coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe, and whether for convenience or preference, usually drank it barefooted. To ensure coffee was as strong as possible, cooks added new grounds to old grounds until the coffee pot had reached capacity. The men half lived on coffee, mentions of one cook, Oliver Nelson's, writings. Coffee was the only thing that kept cowboys awake and vigilant through night shifts and bad weather. 5. Common breads were sourdough and hardtack. Sourdough was the bread of preference for trail outfits equipped with a chuck wagon and cook, willing to rise early with the sourdough starter. Bread and Basil states that starter, made from a mixture of water and flour left to ferment, generates lactic acid bacteria and wild yeast, forming a natural yeast culture, which has versatile potential as a leavening agent for various breads. Once ready, the starter gets combined with the proper water and flour proportions to form dough. Though a bit meticulous, since the starter required regular tending, this was a portable way to bake bread on the trail. Sourdough was also used to make biscuits and flapjacks in Dutch ovens and skillets, giving an array of cowboy baked goods a tantalizing sour tint. Though much less appetizing, hardtack was another prevalent bread source in cowboys' diets, but many would probably debate its edibility. Also called hot rocks, these biscuits were a simple utilitarian concoction of flour, water, and salt. Cooked until no moisture remained, these biscuits had a long shelf life, remaining digestible for months, if not years. But hardtack was so hard that eating it was difficult without the aid of milk, water, or coffee to soften the bread. Though this concept of shelf-stable biscuits dates back to legions of soldiers and crews of sailors that predate the American West, cowboy cooks found a new use for hardtack as a stew thickener, which was probably its most palatable form. 6. Easy access to fresh meat. Driving cattle day and night meant that beef could be a fallback food source for cowboys, and a fresh steak or beef roast made for a luxurious trailside supper. But fresh meat could only be eaten when there were enough workers and resources to consume the whole animal. We could not keep ourselves in fresh meat like a cow outfit does on a roundup for the reason that we had a smaller crew than the average roundup uses, Dr. Slata notes one cowboy's recount. Another reason was that our animals were of large size, and with the weather so very hot, meat would not have kept fresh. Dr. Slata further emphasizes a saying among stingier ranchers on the range: "Only a fool eats his own beef." For these reasons, preserved beef was more often consumed, as meat didn't last long in the wilderness, with no form of refrigeration, but beef jerky could last a significantly long time. While perfectly edible on its own as an easy source of protein, jerky was also often included in stews, which could soften it back to a meaty consistency and contribute texture and flavor to a Dutch oven blend. If not beef, there was ample opportunity to hunt for other forms of game on the range, which contributed some variety to the cowboy diet. Deer and buffalo were occasionally encountered, as were smaller animals, like hares and possums, that could easily get cooked into a stew or eaten a la carte.